On August 3, 1944, a coded telegram arrived at German High Command in Berlin. It had been sent from London by Agent Alaric, one of the Third Reich's most trusted intelligence operatives in England. The message was short, but its meaning was devastating. It read, "FUSAG movement confirmed halted, Third Army now identified in the Normandy sector under Patton's command. Previous intelligence regarding a Calais invasion appears compromised. Request immediate assessment." When the report reached Adolf Hitler at the Wolf's Lair headquarters in East Prussia, the room reportedly fell into a heavy silence. For nearly 2 months, Hitler had kept Germany's 15th Army, 15 full divisions totaling more than 150,000 men, positioned around the Pas-de-Calais, waiting for an invasion force that never actually existed. The supreme leader of Nazi Germany had been deceived by inflatable tanks, fake radio traffic, dummy landing craft, and an elaborate network of misinformation so convincing that historians still study it today with amazement. This was Operation Fortitude, the most ambitious strategic deception campaign of the Second World War. It was a battle fought not with bullets or bayonets but with psychology, deception, and the manipulation of fear and expectation. To understand why the Allies created such a massive deception, it is important to examine the situation they faced in the spring of 1944. The Atlantic Wall stood before them. After the disastrous deep raid in August 1942, where Canadian forces suffered catastrophic losses in a single day, Hitler became obsessed with defending Europe's coastline. He ordered the creation of what he called Fortress Europe. From Norway to the Spanish border, more than 2,400 miles of coastline were transformed into defensive positions. Thousands of concrete bunkers, millions of mines, heavy artillery batteries, and underwater obstacles were placed to destroy any invasion force attempting to land. The man chosen to oversee much of this immense defense system was Erwin Rommel, the legendary Desert Fox and one of Germany's most respected commanders. Rommel understood something many German officers ignored. If the invasion began successfully, Germany might never recover. He believed the Allies had to be stopped directly on the beaches before they could establish a foothold inland. In a letter written to his wife during April 1944, Rommel explained his fears clearly. The enemy would only have one opportunity to invade, and Germany would only have one opportunity to stop them. Everything depended on the opening hours of the assault. But Rommel faced a nearly impossible challenge. The French coastline was simply too large to defend with equal strength everywhere. Intelligence reports suggested the Allies were preparing an invasion force of unprecedented scale, possibly close to 2 million men. The most logical landing point appeared to be the Pas-de-Calais. It was the narrowest part of the English Channel, with only 21 miles separating Dover from the French coast. It also provided the shortest route toward Germany's industrial regions and the Ruhr Valley. Nearly every principle of military strategy suggested Calais would be the target. Still, Rommel refused to rely entirely on assumptions. He strengthened Normandy's defenses as well, placing obstacles along the beaches and flooding fields behind the coast to prevent airborne landings. Some German commanders criticized him for wasting resources in the wrong region. Rommel answered that he would rather waste concrete than waste German soldiers. Then, during the early days of May 1944, the Allied deception campaign entered its most dangerous and decisive phase. German reconnaissance aircraft soon returned with photographs that appeared to confirm every suspicion held by the Nazi high command. The fields of southeast England, especially near Dover and Folkestone, seemed crowded with military equipment. Reconnaissance images showed rows of Sherman tanks, landing craft gathered along rivers, artillery positions spread across the countryside, and constant military activity. Radio intercepts also indicated enormous troop concentrations throughout Kent and Sussex. Most importantly of all, George S. Patton had reportedly been seen in Dover. For German intelligence officers, this became the final confirmation they needed. Patton was viewed as America's most aggressive battlefield commander, the fast-moving general who had stormed through Sicily with relentless speed and confidence. Surely a man like Patton would command the main Allied invasion force. The Germans believed the Americans would never assign their most feared offensive commander to a mere diversionary attack. Therefore, the real invasion, they concluded, had to be aimed at Calais. What German intelligence did not realize was that every single piece of evidence they had collected had been deliberately manufactured. The architect behind Operation Fortitude was not a famous battlefield commander or naval admiral. He was a British intelligence officer named John Bevan, the head of a secret organization known as the London Controlling Section. Bevan understood an idea that would later become central to modern intelligence strategy. In war, perception can often become more powerful than reality itself. The challenge facing the Allies was enormous. They could not truly hide the D-Day invasion force. Thousands of ships and hundreds of thousands of soldiers could not simply disappear from sight. So instead of concealing the invasion, Bevan decided to create a story so believable that the Germans would accept it without question. The enemy would see exactly what they expected to see, even while the truth stood directly before them. His plan was surprisingly simple in concept. He would invent an entirely fictional military force called the 1st United States Army Group, or FUSAG, and place it in southeast England opposite Calais. This imaginary army would appear so large, so heavily armed, and so obviously prepared for invasion that German commanders would remain focused on Calais even after the real Allied landings began in Normandy. For the deception to succeed, however, 3 critical elements were required. First, the Germans needed visual proof. Reconnaissance aircraft had to observe what appeared to be a massive invasion force preparing for battle. Second, there had to be electronic evidence. German radio intelligence needed to detect the communications of a large and active army group. Third, German spies operating inside Britain needed to confirm the story through human intelligence reports. The deception had to be validated by sources Berlin already trusted. Each requirement demanded a completely different method and an extraordinary level of coordination. During March 1944, an unusual collection of soldiers arrived at bases across southeast England. They were not typical infantrymen or artillery crews. Many were artists, designers, engineers, actors, and sound specialists recruited from advertising agencies, movie studios, and theater companies. These men belonged to the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, though their official title concealed their real purpose. They soon became known as the Ghost Army. Their commander, Colonel Clifford G. Simons, explained their mission in direct and unforgettable terms. Their duty was to save Allied lives by creating convincing illusions and false impressions of military power where none actually existed. The technical difficulties were enormous. The first major challenge involved creating fake tanks capable of deceiving German aerial reconnaissance. Engineers working with the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company designed inflatable Sherman tanks, full-sized replicas realistic enough to appear genuine from the sky. The inflatable tanks could be fully deployed in less than 20 minutes using portable air compressors. From 30,000 feet in the air, the altitude normally used by German reconnaissance aircraft to avoid anti-aircraft fire, these rubber tanks appeared almost identical to genuine armored vehicles. They produced the correct shadows, matched the right dimensions, and blended naturally into the landscape below. But the deception required more than appearance alone. A real tank moving across farmland would leave heavy track marks pressed into the soil, while inflatable vehicles obviously could not. To solve this problem, American engineers drove actual tracked vehicles through the fields each night, creating realistic patterns around every dummy tank position. When German photo analysts later studied reconnaissance images, they found exactly what they expected to see: visible evidence of massive armored formations preparing for invasion. The same methods were used for artillery. Inflatable guns and dummy batteries were positioned across southeast England, covered with camouflage nets that were intentionally torn or imperfect because camouflage that looked too perfect might itself appear suspicious. Fake landing craft built from wood and canvas were floated along rivers in Kent. Crews coated them with used motor oil so that, from a distance, they resembled weathered steel vessels preparing for combat operations. Entire fake airfields were also constructed with extraordinary attention to detail. Dummy aircraft stood along runways while fake fuel trucks, maintenance equipment, storage depots, and even laundry lines outside barracks completed the illusion of a living military base. One especially clever tactic involved intentionally leaving certain pieces of equipment only partially hidden. Allied planners understood that German intelligence officers trusted information more when they believed they had discovered it through careful observation rather than when it appeared too obvious. Yet visual deception alone was not enough. The illusion also needed a believable electronic presence. Lieutenant Colonel Harry Reeder commanded one of the strangest units in the American military, the Signal Service Company Special. His men were not trained primarily as combat soldiers. Their mission was to speak, transmit, and imitate the communications of an entire army group. A real military force generates endless streams of radio traffic every day. Supply requests, personnel reports, weather updates, medical evacuations, engineering orders, and maintenance schedules all create distinctive communication patterns. Intelligence officers call this a radio signature, a recognizable electronic fingerprint that can be monitored and analyzed. The operators within the Ghost Army reproduced this system in extraordinary detail. One radio operator might request fuel deliveries for an armored division while another confirmed movement schedules for infantry units preparing for transport. Every exchange was carefully planned to sound authentic. These were not meaningless random signals. They formed elaborate performances designed to imitate the tedious but believable bureaucracy of a massive military organization preparing for war. The operators even added personal conversations to strengthen the illusion. They talked casually about sports results, complained about the miserable English weather, and discussed ordinary daily frustrations. One operator reportedly carried on a continuing story about plans for his upcoming wedding. These details created what intelligence professionals describe as a pattern of life, the natural and slightly disorganized rhythm of genuine human communication. Across the English Channel, German listening stations intercepted every transmission. Teams of analysts worked continuously to map signal locations, identify unit designations, and estimate troop movements throughout southeast England. The conclusion reached by German intelligence appeared undeniable. Southeast England seemed to contain the largest concentration of Allied military power anywhere in Britain. The radio traffic suggested the presence of at least 45 to 50 divisions, possibly more than 1 million soldiers preparing for invasion. What the Germans never realized was that much of this enormous electronic army was being created by only a few dozen highly trained radio operators working from carefully scripted deception plans. In reality, only a small group of radio specialists was impersonating the communications network of an entire army. But the most dangerous and ultimately decisive part of Operation Fortitude was not the fake tanks or the false radio signals. It was the human element behind the deception. British intelligence, especially the counterintelligence service known as MI5, had achieved something extraordinary during the early years of the war. Through a mixture of careful planning, skilled surveillance, and remarkable luck, they managed to capture or neutralize every German spy operating inside Britain. Not most of them, not nearly all of them. Every single known German agent had been identified. Some were arrested and imprisoned, others faced execution. But a select number were persuaded or forced into becoming double agents who would feed false intelligence back to Germany. This became known as the double-cross system, one of the most successful counterintelligence operations in modern history. At the center of it stood an unlikely figure, a Spanish chicken farmer named Juan Pujol Garcia. Pujol had originally attempted to volunteer for British intelligence but was rejected. Refusing to give up, he instead approached German intelligence officers and convinced them he possessed access to valuable British secrets. Using only public information, travel guides, reference books, and his imagination, he began sending fabricated intelligence reports to the Germans. His stories were so convincing that German intelligence gave him the codename Alaric and paid him large amounts of money for his information. Eventually, British intelligence discovered what Pujol was doing and recruited him into their own operation. They gave him the codename Garbo, comparing his acting skills to those of famous actress Greta Garbo. Under MI5 supervision, Pujol created an entirely fictional spy network across Britain. According to his reports, he controlled numerous agents, including a Venezuelan student in Glasgow, a pro-German Welsh nationalist, and even sympathetic British military personnel. None of these people actually existed. Yet the intelligence supposedly provided by this imaginary network was carefully crafted to support Operation Fortitude and strengthen German belief in an invasion at Calais. During May 1944, Garbo transmitted a series of urgent messages through Madrid to Berlin. The reports described heavy troop concentrations in Kent, growing numbers of armored vehicles near Dover, and soldiers wearing the insignia of the fictional 1st United States Army Group. One message claimed that General George S. Patton himself had been personally observed inspecting headquarters positions in southeast England. Another warned that invasion preparations appeared centered around the Dover and Folkestone region, strongly suggesting an attack against Calais. German intelligence trusted Garbo's information so completely that in June 1944 they awarded him the Iron Cross Second Class, presented in absentia because traveling to Germany would have exposed his identity. After the war, Britain honored him as well by appointing him a member of the Order of the British Empire. Juan Pujol Garcia became one of the very few individuals decorated by both sides during the Second World War. The final piece of the deception, and perhaps the most psychologically important, involved General Patton himself. By early 1944, Patton had become one of the most controversial figures in the American military. During the Sicily campaign, he had struck 2 hospitalized soldiers whom he believed were cowards, though they were actually suffering from severe combat exhaustion, now recognized as post-traumatic stress disorder. The scandal caused outrage in both the American military and the press. Dwight D. Eisenhower removed Patton from active frontline command for a period, but despite the controversy, German leaders still regarded him as America's most dangerous battlefield commander. The American press demanded that George S. Patton be removed from military service altogether. But Dwight D. Eisenhower understood Patton's value better than most. Rather than discard him, Eisenhower decided to use Patton as a weapon in an entirely different kind of battle. At Allied headquarters, Eisenhower reportedly explained the situation with complete honesty. The Germans considered Patton the finest offensive commander in the American army. They believed no major invasion would ever occur without him leading it. The Allies intended to turn that belief against Germany itself. Patton was assigned command of the fictional 1st United States Army Group, the enormous phantom force created for Operation Fortitude. When Patton asked how many divisions he would command, the answer was astonishing. None. The army existed only on paper in radio signals and in the minds of German intelligence officers. Patton was reportedly furious. He wanted battlefield action, not theatrical deception, yet despite his frustration, he remained a disciplined officer who understood the importance of orders. For the next several months, Patton made himself highly visible throughout southeast England. He inspected inflatable tanks as if they were genuine armored formations. He visited dummy landing craft and toured fake military camps. He even delivered speeches connected to divisions that did not actually exist. German agents carefully reported every sighting back to Berlin. The psychological effect unfolded exactly as Allied planners hoped. German intelligence concluded that the Americans were deliberately trying to hide Patton's true role. Public criticism of him was interpreted not as punishment, but as a cover story meant to disguise his command of the main invasion force. To German analysts, the logic seemed obvious. If Patton was in southeast England, then the principal attack must be aimed at Calais. Even Adolf Hitler repeatedly pointed to Patton's presence near Dover during conferences with senior commanders as proof that Calais remained the real target. The irony was extraordinary. One of the most aggressive combat commanders in American history was helping win one of the war's most important battles without firing a single shot. Then came June 6, 1944. Early that morning, Allied troops stormed ashore on the beaches of Normandy, including the bloody landing at Omaha Beach. In Berlin, Hitler was asleep. He had remained awake deep into the night and had ordered that he not be disturbed. When he finally awoke later that morning, aides informed him of the Normandy landings. Hitler immediately dismissed the invasion as a diversion. He insisted the true assault would still arrive at Calais. As a result, he ordered the powerful German 15th Army to remain in position instead of reinforcing Normandy. The divisions stationed near Calais continued waiting for Patton and the fictional invasion force that did not exist. Throughout the day, desperate German commanders in Normandy sent urgent requests for reinforcements. Reports warned that they were facing the full strength of the Allied invasion and required immediate support. But headquarters continued replying that Normandy was only a feint and that the primary invasion had not yet begun. So the German 15th Army, fresh, heavily armed, and positioned relatively close to Normandy, remained inactive while Allied forces fought desperately to secure the beaches. German troops stood guarding an empty coastline against inflatable tanks, fake landing craft, and imaginary radio traffic. Operation Fortitude continued even after D-Day. For nearly 7 weeks, German High Command still feared a second and larger invasion aimed at Calais. Even as Allied troops pushed deeper into France and captured major positions, German leaders hesitated to release reserves because they believed Patton's true assault was still coming. Only later, when Patton finally appeared in France leading the very real United States Third Army, did the scale of the deception become impossible to deny. The realization was devastating for German leadership. In August 1944, after the truth could no longer be ignored, Gerd von Rundstedt reportedly reflected that Germany had been defeated not simply by greater force, but by superior intelligence and understanding of German thinking. Hitler reacted with fury when he fully accepted that FUSAG had been an elaborate fabrication. Witnesses later described him shouting at intelligence officers and demanding explanations for how German intelligence services had been deceived so completely. Yet the true importance of the deception was measured not in Hitler's anger, but in lives saved on the Normandy beaches. Military historians believe that if the German 15th Army had moved immediately against the Allied landings on June 6, casualties during the first days of the invasion might have increased dramatically. Some historians argue the Normandy beachhead itself could have collapsed under the pressure. The Ghost Army and Operation Fortitude saved countless lives by convincing Germany to fight an illusion instead of reality. There is also a final irony surrounding Patton's role in the operation. Despite his importance to the deception, he personally believed he had wasted valuable months sitting in England while other soldiers fought in France. In private writings during 1944, Patton worried that history might remember him as absent during the war's defining moment. History ultimately judged him very differently, yet his frustration reveals something important about deception itself. The most effective lies are often those so convincing that even some of the people involved begin partially believing them. Operation Fortitude demonstrated a lasting truth about modern warfare. Victory depends not only on the strength an army truly possesses, but also on the strength the enemy believes it possesses. In that sense, the Ghost Army became one of the most powerful forces involved in D-Day. Their weapons were inflatable vehicles, false radio transmissions, staged movements, and human imagination. And with those unusual weapons, they helped change the course of the Second World War.